we can walk down the wrong path. For some people, that might look like studying anthropology and getting a degree only to realize this isn't quite the field for you. For other people, it might look like starting an Etsy store and doing jewelry only to realize you're not super passionate about jewelry. For myself, it looked like going ahead and working in an insurance claim job only to realize that this wasn't the area for me. And it's in getting in tune with our vocation slowly over time that we begin to realize, oh, of course that path wasn't meant for me. Of course that wasn't what I'm meant to be doing for the rest of my life. But prior to that, it can be really difficult to discern what the right path is and also what our temptation paths are, these paths that pull us away from the actual path that we're meant for. And so I want to explore some very common temptation paths so that if you're on one of these, or if you've even considered one of these paths, you can understand why and potentially change your direction. And so my name is Joel Yulee. I'm a philosopher. I am absolutely obsessed with vocations and paths and callings. And that's why I'm here on places like YouTube, Substack. I have a podcast called the Archetypes podcast to educate people about this. That's why I founded this online membership that shows people how to choose the right career path with conviction by unearthing their very own career archetype so that they can go ahead and walk their path, because I believe that every single person in this world has a unique calling. And when we're not truly tuned into that calling, we can end up leading this life of regret and resentment, and that's something that we absolutely want to avoid and can avoid. And so we have to understand that there are temptation paths out there. There are these paths that are going to pull us away from the actual path. Now, if you don't know what a temptation path is, it's simply a path whereby you get seduced into a career and you start doing work in that career, but that work isn't actually what you're meant for. It's not the thing that you are born to do. It's not your calling. Instead, it's fulfilling some other type of need. Now, there are two types of temptation paths. The first one is this partial alignment, meaning that a particular path partially aligns with some sort of activation within you that is connected to your calling. So one example I might give is a lot of people that are creative, right? They want to be creative out in the world. They might pursue a path that is graphic design for some social media agency. Now, they're not going to be able to fulfill the upper limits of their creativity, but it partially overlaps with what they're meant to be doing, and therefore they start pursuing that path and ends up taking them off path a lot of the times. Now, another type of temptation path is one where that fulfills and satisfies certain human base level needs, but it limits other needs. And so what this one might look like is somebody that works a job to pay the bills, and they're just going through the motions of things, and they can never really begin to satisfy their spiritual life or nurture any of their creative pursuits. Maybe outside of work time they're able to do it, but oftentimes not, because they get home and they're too tired and they just need to, relax and unwind in order to begin to do what they just did again and again and again until it's the weekend. And even then, it's really hard to get the time to be able to pursue their creative pursuits or their spiritual inclinations, or even both. This is why some people that are hyper creative might end up pursuing different paths that aren't quite fulfilling, and then they'll say, oh, I'm going to just pursue my hobby on the weekend, and really that hobby is the thing that they're meant to be doing, but they don't want to face it, otherwise it means that they have to upend their entire lives. And so there can be these different types of temptation paths, and I really want to explore 4 different common temptation paths that I've noticed just again and again and again for people that are creatively inclined and spiritually inclined. And I want you to explore whether you've considered them or whether you yourself are on them, to get a better understanding of, is this a temptation path for myself that I need to reflect on and potentially change? Or is this actually the thing that I'm meant to be doing and I can just go absolutely all in? So the very first temptation path that I want to explain and explore is yoga instructor. So a lot of people get into yoga and they'll do a class and suddenly they feel like more at peace, more at home. They'll start to even be able to explore some of the spiritual components of yoga. And because they're starting to feel this way, maybe they even just like being amongst a community, amongst a group of others who sort of just get it without the need to explain it. They start to seriously do it, and they do it a lot, and they become a practitioner. And then over time, they start to think, well, maybe I should do this full time. I'm really interested in it. I'm getting pulled towards it. Maybe this is the thing for me. And as they start to go through this, then they start to pursue it in this 1, 2, 3 step way. And what I mean by that is there's a path laid out for yoga instructors whereby they can go get the particular accreditation, they can go do their 200 hours, and once that's done, then they can go and look for either a job where they're instructing people, or maybe potentially they want to open up their own business, or maybe they want to teach people online. Now, this is absolutely correct for the person that is a yoga instructor. However, it becomes a temptation path when it doesn't quite encapsulate everything that you're meant to be pursuing. Oftentimes, this arises like this feeling of, it's kind of off, doesn't quite fit. There's something missing here. I don't know what it is, so I'm going to continue on, but there's something missing. When you're having those feelings, oftentimes being a yoga instructor is a temptation path. I remember a student that I worked with, and we had done some work together, and in the beginning she actually didn't know what her path was, and after we did some work we ended up unearthing her career archetype, which is this base level pattern that instructs and guides us on what our calling is in this life. And her career archetype was a psychosomatic healer. And as we started to explore her career archetype, we ended up realizing that, hey, you actually need to be developing your own theories. And so staying within the confines of the tradition of the type of yoga that she practiced meant that she couldn't explore outside those boundaries. And for some people, that is absolutely correct. But for her, she needed to push beyond and start finding different areas of philosophies, different ways of seeing how she was using the body and the psychology together and merging these two things. And staying within yoga didn't allow her to properly explore this. Another thing that happens that I'm reminded of is some people that they go and they start expressing and being a yoga instructor, and yet they need to go and have a path that is more isolated. For whatever reasons, they're more inclined like that, but they get stuck in doing yoga, and they end up realizing that, hey, I've got to show up, I've got to present on a consistent basis for the entirety of my career. And that can be really, really tough. And they're actually not wired that way, nor do they want to pursue a vocation like that, but they weren't really thinking it through properly. And so they ended up on this path, and that led them down the track of being a yoga instructor when really there were certain components of it that was drawing them in, but there were other components that didn't quite match, that didn't quite fit, causing them to walk down this path. So the second temptation path that I see a lot of, and this is particularly for people that are creatively inclined, is book editor. And one of the really interesting things that happens with a lot of creative people is that when they start walking their path, if they're not completely okay with walking a creative path, maybe in the past someone has said something that steered them the wrong way, maybe they've just absorbed via osmosis the beliefs of other people that, again, tell them that, hey, you can't actually pursue a creative life, they start to surround themselves with creative work, but they themselves aren't the ones doing the creative work. And book editor is a really good example of this, and it's why it draws in a lot of creative people. It gets them close, but doesn't get them all the way in, right? They're not actually able to be the people creating the work. Instead, they're doing the edits. And this is a kind of torture. And the reason that it's a kind of torture is they're constantly being given creative work to look at, to organize, to edit, to cross out, to say like, maybe this doesn't go there. And yet they themselves deep down yearn to be the person that does the creative work itself. And in order to do that, they have to face themselves and start to walk a different path, which would potentially disrupt what they're currently doing and cause them to go a little bit backwards in order to go forwards. And I would say forwards further, but they would have to reorient themselves in the world. And an example that actually comes to mind is I remember in English class back in high school, I had an English teacher, and whilst this isn't the book editor exact example, it has the same sort of qualities to it. However, I was talking to this English teacher and she let it slip that she would love to write a novel one day. And me, just being the way that I am, I'm looking at her and saying, well, why not? Why don't you write a novel? What's wrong with that? And she didn't say anything. Instead, she just pointed at the stack of essays that the class had been handing in as if to say, well, hey, I have to mark this, as if this was an adequate excuse. So there we have someone that clearly yearns to do work of the creative quality, but instead is pushing that away and saying like, hey, I've got to be this editor, I have to go and mark these essays, and I can't pursue the path. And yet pursuing that novel, pursuing that creative way of being, pursuing that type of substance is going to give her so much more, and it could potentially turn into her path, but she's not even giving herself the opportunity to do that. Now, another temptation path that I see frequently is the temptation path of the tarot reader. And anybody that has been in and amongst spiritual fields, esoteric fields, occult fields, will bump in eventually to tarot cards. Now, some people have such profound experiences with these tarot cards because they're exploring this guidance system that sort of is coming from this non-local place, and it's connected and formed to mysticism. And it's such a profound tool that a lot of people get into it and say, well, hey, I would love to share this with others. I would love to help other people make their way in life, and I can use tarot cards to do this. And so they do. They start to look out and ask themselves, how can I help inform other people on how to do this? And this might look like creating a business plan for it. They might realize, like, hey, maybe I just go and do this with a few friends. They can give me some reviews. I can put this on my website. I can start to promote it via social media channels, and off and away I go. Suddenly I'm able to do tarot card reading, and I can do that full time. And then it's just about learning my craft, getting really deep in it. Because make no mistake, being a tarot card reader requires just as much mastery as any other field. And there's this period of craftsmanship and really understanding the depth and the complexity of the field itself. But it's all sort of laid out in this, hey, step 1, step 2, step 3. Now, the problem occurs, once again, similar to the path of the yoga instructor, where if it doesn't fit the entirety of what you're doing, it will start to feel off. There'll be this, is this actually my path? Should I be walking this way? It feels like something's missing. And there often is something missing when those alarm bells are going off, and suggesting that maybe doing it this way, or even extrapolating yourself and envisioning yourself at a future state, being a tarot card reader for the rest of your vocation, is like, that doesn't seem correct, or it feels off, or even intuitively I know that that's not the thing. So rather than just continuing on and pursuing that path, instead you need to get to the essence and the core of what it is that you're meant to be doing. I remember I worked with a student who came to me and she didn't quite know what her path was, and one of the temptation paths that she erased and got rid of was the path of tarot card reader. Right? She didn't want to be a tarot reader. However, she found great utility and usefulness in this. She had studied it, she had thought about it seriously, but it wasn't the thing. And we ended up unearthing her career archetype as a community builder. And so the interesting thing here is that she was able to still use tarot cards, right? You don't have to get rid of this stuff forever, but you can use it as this tool within your arsenal. So meaning that you can have all these different domains of knowledge, domains of skill, bringing them into the work that you're doing and allow it to help you do what the essence of the work is. And so she can build communities and bring in tarot card reading into that community where it's accepted, where it's used, where it's spoken about, where maybe she is doing readings within the context of that building of community. But it's not the root, it's not the foundation, it's not the core of the work. The core of the work is building of the community. And the tarot cards play a role in helping that, but it's not the foundation. So this is what I mean when oftentimes people end up knowing their vocation, there's a recentering, and temptation paths are off-center. They're not in the middle. They're not on the foundational level. And so if you're feeling like, hey, this doesn't quite fit, or I know I need this piece in there, but it's not the main thing, then oftentimes you haven't connected with the main thing, that's at a lower level, but you can still bring those other pieces in to help support you and support what it is that you're meant to be doing. But you first have to identify that so that you can discern where its placement is within your path. And so that's another temptation path that I see frequently. Now, the fourth temptation path that I see frequently is, and this once again leans towards people that are typically creative, is art teacher. Now, the amount of people that I know who have told their parents and said, I'm really into art, and they have then suggested to them, well, maybe you should be an art teacher. The list is just... And the reason for this, right, is because there's an ease and understandability. There's also this sense of safety And so there's a lot of parents and people around that will say, hey, this is a safe path. This is an okay path. It's already laid out. You don't have to go off into art land, which is treacherous. And, this is the perceptions and the belief. It's treacherous and worrisome, and you might not be able to make rent or buy a house in the future. And so you just want to stay the course. You just want to stay within the domain of teaching art. And a lot of people that are into the arts and into creating art themselves end up thinking, well, maybe I should do that. Maybe I should just take the safe path. And they end up being close, once again, to creativity itself, but they're not really doing it at the level at which they know they need to do it at. And so they can avoid this, and they can move completely away from the core of the creative work that they need to be doing. And the interesting thing here is that art teacher is more towards the educational. It's more towards the showing people how to do it, talking about it, as opposed to the pure creative expression itself. And for some people, that is absolutely fine. They are meant to be an art teacher. They are meant to do that with their lives. That is their calling. But if you are someone that knows deep down that you have this creative expression that needs to come out, and it's really intense, and it's just buzzing within you, then to go ahead and be an art teacher means that the educational component is going to dominate the creative component. We don't want that. We want the creative component in your vocation to be the vital force, to lead the way. I was actually speaking with a member that I work with, and he recently unearthed his career archetype as a creative paranormal scientist. And the interesting thing about him is he said that he had been suggested art teacher and had been told, like, hey, you should probably do this. And the reason for that was because it was the safe path. But in going through this process of self-understanding and this process of knowing what it was that he was meant to be doing with his life, he realized that creativity needed to be the essential force driving his work. It allowed him to have all this range of being able to discover what exactly he needed to do, and to sort of push this down and say, hey, I'm just going to teach people rather than expressing this creative force at the top, because you can still educate people. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But you need to know whereabouts on this hierarchy it is. Is creativity at the top? Is that the leader? Or is education at the top? Is that the leader? So for someone like me, education is at the top. For someone like him, creativity is at the top. And it's just about knowing yourself so that you can discern which way to go. So if you are someone that is considering art teacher, if you are someone that is potentially even walking this path, and it's feeling kind of off, it's feeling like you can't go all in, it's feeling like you can't throw yourself into it, or even, you're just getting this drag, this trudge through the mud, you want to reconsider, is this the path for you? Or are you doing it because it's close to the path? It's kind of the path. It's sort of. There's a partial overlap, but it's not actually the thing. And if it's not actually the thing, then you want to start to reflect on that. Why isn't it the thing? Because all four of these temptation paths, right? All four of these temptation paths can be the calling for people. Being a yoga instructor, when people are truly connected to being a yoga instructor, you'll see it in their vitality. You'll see it in the way they talk about it. It's just everywhere in their life. It's just, completely that they're just absorbed with it. For people that are super interested in book editing, they're going to be all about it, right? They want to talk about the craft. And for people that aren't into book editing, they're like, yeah, okay, you're going to tell me about this again? Even some people are meant to be both book editors and also writing at the same time. But the problem is always when you have someone that is meant to be writing or creating and they're doing these other things that are close to the actual thing itself, we get a lot of problems arising. Same with tarot reader, and they're not truly connected to the craft itself. Maybe they're connected to using it as a facet to the work they're meant to be doing, but they're not really absorbed with it. Same with an art teacher, not really being in love with education and instead just wanting the art component is only going to lead to pain. It's only going to lead to, teaching people in a way where you're not truly connected to the work. And the people that are receiving that work, they're not going to get all that they need to get from you. Whereas if you're pursuing the calling, then you're fulfilling yourself. You're also able to serve other people in a way that only they can be served. And that is the correct route. You have to discern this. You have to connect with what your calling is. And the more that you connect with what your calling is, the easier it is to discern the paths. So if you're on one of these paths, if you're on one of these paths and you realize, okay, I've always sort of felt like something was missing or something's off, then reflect. And if you want to know how I go about this process, how I teach people how to identify their own temptation paths, figure out which ones to get rid of, figure out which ones to burn away, then you'll want to go ahead and check out our online membership, where I help people to choose the right career path with conviction by unearthing their very own career archetype. We have an 8-week course which takes people step by step through this process of coming to an awareness of what their career archetype is internally. We use multiple different models of perspective, and once people come to an awareness of what their career archetype is, then we start to structure it. Like, what does this look like in the real world? How do you actually make money from this path? How does it act and how does it look? And we also get into later on, what does the lifestyle look like for you, which is all connected to your own self-knowledge, which is connected to your career archetype. So if you're interested in that, I'll leave a link below.